Mark, Laura, that's right. So there may be more homeless people on the street in Seattle, but homelessness is rising at a quicker rate in East King County. Bellevue is trying to update its land use code to lay the groundwork for a permanent housing shelter sometime down the line. Well, this has morphed into a contentious issue, with homeless service providers worried that the new regulations would hinder their work with the vulnerable population. But first, let's break down how we got to tonight's meeting and vote. Now, this all stems from a conversation that began 2 years ago when the city recognized that it needs to focus on homelessness. Currently, there is no permanent homeless shelter in Bellevue. There is an emergency shelter, though, for women. The men's emergency shelter, that's only open in the winter, so there's no place for men to go in Bellevue right now. This land use code amendment, or LUCA, would set rules that shelter providers would have to follow, including where that shelter building can be, services it has to provide, and enforcement plan for residents. There's also a code of conduct for those residents, and that is one item that does not sit well with providers. Since the beginning of the year, providers have been advocating in city council meetings to make the regulations less strict. Angela Murray of the Sophia Way argues that rules right now based on public input, not quite based on evidence-based practices proven to set homeless people up for success. Some contested LUCA items include regulating the residents' behavior in public and how much public input would be involved in planning and permitting. Murray says some of these rules actually criminalize homelessness. The city says this debate over the LUCA is proof of its commitment to this issue.
Some of the concerns I'm looking at is the panhandling, the loitering, the no camping. We're also required to post the routes that the women would be walking to and from the shelter as part of the safety and security plan, and that would be public. A lot of our women are survivors of domestic violence. They have been, some of our women have actually been through human trafficking, almost all of them have experienced some type of sexual violence or sexual assault, physical assault since they become homeless or leading up to that. So we certainly don't want to make those routes public.
So each of those has different points of view, and they've been talked about amongst the council and the community. All those different points of view, I think, represent the commitment to finding the ultimate set of regulations that would allow a shelter to be successful in Bellevue.
So this really is an issue of finding the balance of making the shelter providers happy and the rest of the public happy. Now, if the LUCA is not passed tonight, interim rules will be taking place. The council will reconvene next Monday for another vote. The study session begins at 6 p.m. tonight at City Hall. The vote takes place at 8 p.m. Mark, Lori.